Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma in the mountains of western North Carolina. Mount Soma is home of the Sri Someshwara Temple. And I'm here today with Scott and Adrian. And today's topic is the pandemic, the great pandemic. Before we get started, I wanted to make maybe a few little comments or announcements or whatever. One thing is, I think I already said this in the previous podcast, but the gold linga now is in process. And so as soon as they make it, we'll get that rolling. So that's wonderful. And another thing is, essentially, I think anybody who's studied with me would say my teachings are very eclectic. We talk about anything. In fact, sometimes I say, let's talk about anything, ask me anything. And one thing I like about that is whatever the topic is, it relates back to, really deep spiritual knowledge. But really my passion is the deep spiritual knowledge. I guess I should say Punit Prasad says that, 1 in a million people want knowledge, to that depth. But to me, well, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I enjoy living in these mountains. There are a lot of Baptists, and there are Baptist radio stations. There's one in particular that I really like listening to, and different ministers give their sermons, and I just enjoy it. But one thing I noticed is everything they say, it seems, has very deep, profound implications. But they kind of just, keep it. It seems like keeping it on a surface level, even though the Baptist ministers I've talked to privately really want the deep knowledge. But as far as their sermons go, the kingdom of heaven is within. What does that mean, But they kind of leave it there, and people seem to be happy with it. And that's okay. I think that's not limited to just Christianity at all. I think it applies to all religions, but to me, I'm just passionate on really taking a deep look on, really what's going on. How does this universe work? How does that relate to spirituality? I like to say that spirituality is the vessel that holds all the different fields of knowledge, physics, religion, everything in the context of that deep spiritual knowledge gives it all so much more meaning. But having said that, these podcasts lately, they've been focused more on kind of world events and things like that. And I think they need to be. I think that's where people's attention is these days. And it certainly is for me. What's going on in the world, and in our country, in the United States, but really the whole world. And if I can put it this way, please forgive me. It's a little, flippant or whatever, but it's almost like I'd like to think that you're doing your homework and your homework assignment was, forgive me for saying it that way, but listen, the news is the news. And what I mean by that is that the news that's being broadcast, and taking a step back and looking at that, has now become really more the news than anything, because there are all these different broadcast stations. Some are conservative, some are liberal, and they all kind of are giving their perspective on it. And so really that is the news. And if you're listening to just one, then you're not really taking a step back and looking at the real news, which is the news, what's going on with it. So that's why I've encouraged you, even if it's just a few minutes, at least check out different channels, even the ones you can't stand, and hear what they have to say. You try to get a context, and not to get your buttons pushed or to solidify your particular perspective, but to try to get a broader view of, how the world is functioning, how people are thinking, couple other things before we, get into the great pandemic. Somebody sent in a comment because I talked about our nature as people and what our nature is, and somebody made some comment about, our nature isn't divine, or I forget how they put it. And it reminded me, I talk about this in my lecture, sometimes I refer to it. There's The African Queen, that movie with Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. And Katharine Hepburn was this very proper spiritual lady, religious lady, and Bogart was kind of this crude ruffian guy, a good movie. But at one point she was talking about, I don't know, his drinking or whatever it was he was doing. And he said, "It's my nature, And she said, "Your nature, sir, is what you've come onto this earth to overcome," something like that. And I thought, what a shame, Your nature is divine. And the thing is, we have our conditionings, our programmings, our biases, the stresses and strains in our being and our awareness, however you want to put that, that kind of overshadow our own true nature. But to consider that the way the world is, with all the stresses and strains and distortions in people, and to consider those stresses and strains to be our nature, it's just not right. It's a little bit like looking at a beautiful gemstone with some dust on it, and looking at the dust and saying, "Oh, the nature of the gemstone is obviously dust." No, the whole spiritual path is just brushing away the dust, so that the gemstone that we are is allowed to shine, And that's why they call it emancipation. Spiritual enlightenment isn't the acquisition of anything. It's just the emancipation from all these twisted emotions and thoughts and biases and wounds and blah, 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 like that. So deep spirituality, for one, it's not facts. I think a lot of people think, oh, if I can memorize the 10 Commandments and do my best to align with those, or, whatever religion, then I'm a more spiritual person. Or if I can rattle off the 1,000 names of Vishnu or different verses of the Bible, then I'm a spiritual person. Those things are good. Don't get me wrong. They're very good. But real spirituality isn't about that. Those are just facts. That's just information you've memorized. What lies deeper than the facts is an understanding, concept, if you will, an understanding of what those things really are on deeper and deeper levels. That's why I say our growth isn't so much about learning new facts. So that's what people oftentimes think it is and try to do. But it's even more about having a deeper relationship with the facts we already know. So it's just a deepening process, and that's largely, so it's concepts, you see. And so largely, that's a function of our level of consciousness. They say that knowledge is even structured in consciousness. So as your consciousness expands, as your consciousness deepens, your relationship with everything you think you know or thought you knew or whatever deepens and transforms. And it's a subtle knowledge. And it's almost like double-edged, because depending on how we view any one concept, we can have different perspectives on it, contradictory perspectives. And it's not that one is necessarily right and the other is necessarily wrong. It's just that they coexist. Paradox is the nature of relativity, you see? So what I wanted to talk about today, and what the real pandemic is, I mean, yeah, the virus and all that, and that's a pandemic. If you don't mind me digressing here a minute, well, maybe I shouldn't. I just go off on tangents. But if you listen to my old podcast about the pandemic, it's just, I wish I didn't even bring this up, but it's the nature of our approach to it in the beginning was really mistaken, and I talked about it because I'm a veterinarian. Veterinarians are more into herd health than MDs, generally speaking. And the idea of taking all the people and forcing them into a building and staying locked in, I mean, all that does is spread it, And that's just common sense. I mean, to me, if we just listened to our grandmothers, about how not to get sick and how to stay healthy, we would have done a lot better. And I don't mean to be offensive or anything, but that's just the way I feel about it. And there's a lot now as time goes by, because I made some people angry when I started talking about that, but just basic hygiene and fresh air and things like that, we would have gone a long way in dealing with it. I think a little better than history is going to indicate, and is starting to show, Anyway, sorry about that. It's a tangent, and if I upset you, please forgive me. But at any rate, there's a greater pandemic. It's the real pandemic. It's like the elephant in the room of life that nobody really seems to talk about. And but it's the thing. It's the theme, and and what that is. Sometimes I talk about it, and we can go into this as the acronym IPGACO, and we'll go into that letter by letter. But it's not about new thoughts. It's about a new way of thinking. And what IPGACO does is it takes us into taking a look at the different ways we think, different aspects of how we think, and how that limits our life, compromises our life, compromises our relationships, compromises everything. And that's the real pandemic. That's the great pandemic. And if we could heal that, and again, it's structured in consciousness. And you can't just say, oh, okay, I'm going to stop doing that. No, it's just the way the mind works. But as we evolve, our mind starts to function differently. Not new thoughts, a new way of thinking, a new relationship with, you see? So, Scott, Adrian, is there anything that I inspired that you want to throw in there or anything? Are we good?
I love that. It's not about new thoughts, about a new way of thinking. I mean, I think that's just so right on, because, our conditionings just keep us on our own hamster wheel.
And yeah, and that is all just what the ancient masters, this is ancient knowledge. This is what the ancient masters said. Like Maharishi Patanjali talked about, like he used the word conditioning. He talks about that. Impressions on the mind, impressions on the awareness, how it limits us, and how spiritual growth is freedom from those impressions, those samskaras, Yeah, Adrian, I mean, that's it, So let's take a look at the nature of the mind then, and the ancient and their secret teachings. Why are they secret? Pick up a book and it'll talk about conditioning. Pick up a copy of the Yoga Vashishta, or pick up a copy of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. It's all right there. The reason it's secret is because even after people read those books, it remains a secret to how they function. Again, it just becomes a fact that people memorize, but it's deeper than that, So we're going to go into these ancient secrets, and IPGACO, IPGACO, and the I, it stands for identity. Now, I talked about how it's all a double edge, and because people could hear that and, oh, IPGACO is an issue, or identity is an issue, identity is a problem. No, that can't be right. I'm identified with my family. I'm identified with my culture. I'm identified with my religion. That's all good. And yes, it is good. But we're talking here about identity, the other edge, the other side of the coin. And that is that we become so identified with a perspective. We become so identified with a viewpoint. We become so limited in our thinking and blinders on and channeled. And that's the kind of identity that we're talking about here, that limits our awareness, limits our lives, and is part of the great pandemic. It's not about new thoughts. It's about a new way of thinking. And identity strongly colors and even defines the nature of how we think. Anything else about identity, you guys? Does that pretty much cover it?
Yeah, but also, Michael, it can even like spill into daily lives, because I remember back when I was with Marriott, and there was these presentations that would get taught to the brand new salespeople, and they would adhere to it for a while, and that's the way they would do it. And then they got off course to their own identities, and it stopped working for them. So they threw away the old just to grab on to like a new way of doing it. And then they'd read all the self-help books or the this or that or whatever, hear some other people. And they never realized that all those were just tools in their box. And if they just accessed that place that was inside of them, they had access to all these things.
God, there's so much there, Scotty, that's all so good, you know.
You know,
And I talk about the elasticity of identity. You know, you can talk to them and they can hear. And that's one of the things that really frustrated me about my teachings, to be honest with you. I give these lectures and they're great. And everybody gets up and is so inspired and everything. And they're like, you know, it's changed my life. But what happens is, you know, they walk out of the lecture hall and what happens is the elastic bands, like a rubber band, you know, they just spring, they can't help it to go right back to how they were functioning. Why? Because it's a state of physiology of awareness. It's not an attitude. It's not a philosophy that you take on. And that's a great example, Scott, you know? Yeah. Anything more on identity? Okay, preconceived notions. Now, some of these things that there's an overlap there, granted, but preconceived notions. We have notions of how the world works. And it's remarkable how difficult it is for people to move past those preconceived notions. They become their identity. And preconceived notions, they can be, oh, and another thing you said, Scott, that was so good was it's daily life. We're talking about daily life. These identities and these preconceived notions, they determine how we function moment to moment, day to day, in all our interactions. They color the whole thing. Sometimes they talk about it like it's the color of the glasses you're wearing, and whatever the color of those glasses are, no matter what you look at, no matter what you deal with, it's colored, it's tinted with that identity, with those preconceived notions, you see. And it's remarkable the degree to which that goes. Even you think, you know, scientists aren't they the rational thinkers of our time, you know? Well, Big Bang Theory, one of the theories of the Big Bang, talks about how old the universe is. And then they got the Hubble telescope. I may have talked about this before. And they look out there in the universe, they see a whole galaxy that's older than how old the universe is supposed to be. And what do they do with that? They ignore it. Why? Because they have a preconceived notion they're identified with, and they can't let it go. Darwin's theory of evolution. They did computer studies. It happened way too fast. Darwin couldn't possibly be right. Now, again, that's a whole lecture because I think that my point here is that Darwin's theory is a component of the evolutionary process, but it got sped up because everything is gravitating back to oneness, gravitating back to wholeness, gravitating back to God, however you want to say it, you know. Oh boy. And see, that's the thing too, is we have our preconceived notions about God, for example. And so for a lot of people, and this is one of the big problems with the religion today, a lot of people hear that, oh, we're all gravitating back to God, and there's no deeper understanding of what that means. And for a lot of people, it doesn't matter. Oh, you know, I get it. I'm one with God. Okay, good enough for me. But for other people, they look at that and say, what are you talking about? It doesn't make any sense. But if we could look deeper in the mechanics of creation, the nature of existence, then it does make sense. And so then it becomes a matter of language. It's going to come up with the G, the A, the C, and the O, you know. All these things can be applied. And so you might want to think about these different religious and spiritual principles and how Gecko applies to it, and how through identity, through preconceived notions, on and on, our relationship with that gets compromised. We hear the word God and we have a knee-jerk reaction. And for some people, it's like, oh yeah. And for other people, it's like ridiculous. I'm done. I don't want to hear it anymore. You know. So at Gecko, it just our minds get so compromised by not what we're thinking, but how we're thinking, and how that colors our relationship with what we're thinking, with our relationship with thoughts. Okay, so the next one is the G. That stands for I get it. The I get it syndrome. That's another big one. You know. It keeps us oftentimes from going deeper. We hear something, oh yeah, I get that, or oh yeah, I get it. Or even if you study spiritual teachings, you get to a point where you pick it up on whatever level you picked it up on, whatever level you can understand it on. That's good enough for you. You get it, and that's it. So it becomes an identity, and over time it becomes a preconceived notion. It becomes established in your attitude, and anytime the subject comes up, it's like, oh yeah, I get it. So you just kind of put it in a black box and that's it. You're done. I get it syndrome. It's epidemic. And can it be frustrating, even in a personal relationship, when you're talking to someone and you want to kind of take a deeper look at something, and they just kind of shut you off. Yeah, I get it. I get it. You're good enough for me. Scott, Adrian, anything more? If you guys want to add to any of these things, I'm weak. These things.
Well, they all kind of come together because, the I get it syndrome is, I have my preconceived notions. I already get it. It's part of that. The Gecko turns back on itself because, we already have a belief system and we hear something that sounds similar and we're like, oh yeah, we get that. Yeah. And anything else that is shared is just disregarded because we already get it.
The shared is disregarded. What does that mean?
Yeah, whatever someone else shares is completely disregarded because we already get everything about that. We know everything. There's nothing else to learn. Yeah. And it's almost like they just shut down to any further exploration of anything except what they already know.
And we're so bombarded with so many different things that give it to me in 30 seconds. Okay, I get it. That's it. I'm done.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And that's also true because all these things of Gecko, they're like different facets of the same one diamond. So you're viewing the same diamond, but I think if we speak of it through the window of different facets, we get different insights. And as we explore these things, as we roll them around on our tongue, if you will, if we think about them, then identity, preconceived notion, I get it. These things, they start to help us explore and look more deeply, as opposed to if we just say, okay, identity, But so those are good points. Yeah.
It's like, this is the real pandemic,
This is the real pandemic.
Yeah, that's right.
This is what compromises our relationship with the virus. This is what compromises our relationship with politics. This is what, you name it, right down the line.
Yeah.
Media, you name a subject, medicine, health, diet, exercise, you name it.
Right.
And so the A is association. And why is that so important? Well, it kind of bleeds into the other ones, but you might feel like you get something. And then another topic comes up and you can see how they relate. And so because you get this, you associate it with that, and therefore you get that. And so a lot of the ways we think, it's all about association. What's a good example of that, you guys? Maybe religion. I don't know. You have a certain level of relationship with your religion. And let's say, like so many people these days, you reject religion because you couldn't accept the level of understanding that was offered to you. And so then maybe Hinduism comes up as another example. I already get religion because I rejected it. I'm not interested in it, and therefore Hinduism is the same thing, So it all becomes association,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, what does rabbit taste like? Well, it tastes like chicken.
That's good.
That's funny.
Yeah. And the C, what does the C stand for? Connotations. Yeah. What's a good example of connotations? See, the
Swastika.
Speaking about epidemic, the whole woke thing, the connotations of the word carries more meaning than the meaning of the word. And I mean, the whole woke movement has gone crazy with that, hasn't it? Like what, the Cleveland was a baseball team changed their name to Indians, right? Because there was a connotation that Indians was kind of derogatory. And because in the moment right now, I'm having a hard time getting why. Okay, no, I get why it was derogatory. But on the other hand, isn't it, if the connotation of the word is different, isn't it great? The Indians, I mean, they were deeply spiritual. They had so much, positive. But the connotations, I don't know, maybe from the old cowboy and Indian TV shows, which were really condescending to Indians, weren't they? Oftentimes. But so the connotation carries more meaning than the meaning. And connotations are everywhere, especially these days. I mean, you can hardly say anything without it having connotations that are pushing people's buttons, because the connotations for that person carries more meaning than the actual meaning of the word.
Scotty, what you mentioned is a really loaded one.
Which one? Let's hear it. Say it again.
Oh, just about the swastika.
Oh.
You know how the Germans took what was, a pretty profound symbol, and now the connotation that's on that symbol is now associated with obviously something terrible.
It's a shame. It's a shame, yeah.
And so even people hearing Scotty say that might not be able to get past the current connotation of swastika versus its original, very profound, meaning,
and I talked about how that geometric structure, because in a sense, I talked about Jan truths and the manifestation of existence and consciousness comes aware of itself. Two things are born, and a third thing cascades out to infinity, and there's a whole geometric structure to it. Within that geometric structure is a structure called the swastika. And all these things map, if you've listened to my previous podcast, you know all about mapping. The foot maps onto the whole body. That's reflexology. At any rate, it maps onto the structure of this universe, this propunctum. And every angle of view of the propunctum has these structures woven into the whole geometric, multidimensional dynamic. And so from Earth, when you look at the North Star, and then the planets or the stars all revolve around it season to season, 365 days, 4 seasons. And if you take a photograph of the Big Dipper and superimpose them all, you get a swastika. That's not a coincidence. It's mapping. It's geometric. It's a whole new way of thinking and a whole new level of insight and understanding. Anyway, I don't know how he got onto that, but yeah, the swastika, yeah. Anything else, you guys? That's all good. Everything you guys are saying is fabulous.
I'm so glad you're addressing this, because we are so lost in our own belief systems, our own preconceived notions, so that the connotations that we make are built into all of that. It's all rooted in the structure of the way our conditionings function within our own being. And we just lap back over and over and over on ourselves. We think the same way. We have triggers that keep us running around in the same viewpoints over and over. And that, it is all of that, our own inner dilemma of thinking. We're not even aware of how we're thinking.
It's like hamsters on a hamster wheel. I mean,
it is. And we think that whatever our viewpoint is the only viewpoint. It's the right viewpoint, and everybody else is either wrong or crazy. And we collude with ourselves and with others to support our own
And you just led.
Beliefs.
I got to stop you there because you just led into the next one. The other people. We think, our thinking, okay, it's great, but yeah, other people do that. And oh yeah, Gecko, oh yeah, I see other people doing that. And identity, preconceived notions, I get it, syndrome association, connotations. Oh yeah, people do that all the time, don't they? It's easy to see how other people do it. The hard part is to see how we do it, because from the viewpoint of our window, we get it, So that's why the O is other people. Other people. That's great. It's really sticky. It's even more than sticky. It's confining. It's a box we live in. Yeah, but it's a sticky box. Yeah.
You say it's like the tar baby or something,
Yeah, you can look at it. Yeah, all that.
or quicksand. The more you move around in it, the more you get sucked into it.
Yeah, and if you try to push it away, you just get
Yeah.
And so that's why you see. The most powerful tool then is meditation, because meditation frees the awareness. We just go into that place that is pure unboundedness, beyond thingness, beyond Gecko, But the thing is, if we go back into life and white knuckle onto our Gecko, it inhibits the process. So meditation is the most powerful tool, but then inner exploration that tills the soil and frees up the awareness is the other side of the whole thing, I was thinking, you guys, there's another one that's not part of it, Gecko, but I was thinking about it. It's compartmentalization, and how you see people. There's such a predisposition to compartmentalize, and just one example of that is, we have our own little clique, and we all get along. And it's all beautiful, and we're very respectful of each other, and it's all love and light, or, I shouldn't have said that because that has connotations, right? But it's all positive and good. And, but then we look outside of that little world, and we have a very different relationship with maybe the person down the block, or other countries or other nations. So we compartmentalize. And compartmentalization, it's a whole thing. There are books on it, I'm sure, in psychology, where people will compartmentalize and they'll think one way and they just block out this other stuff. It's not even part of their world. But then they may go over there and look at that thing, and then now they're not doing that anymore. Now they're compartmentalized in this kind of dynamic, in this kind of relationship. So we're living in boxes. We're living in different compartments, and we compartmentalize one to the next. So if Gecko should have two C's there, maybe, I don't know. Yeah. Anything else, you guys, about all that?
Well, just the what to do about it. One, you said meditation. Two, you said inner exploration. But how do you do that inner exploration? What does it look like?
Well, that's a great question, and that's what we just did. A lot of times when I work with people, they say, "Oh my God," and you know this, Adrian, but they say, "Oh my God, now I see what I'm doing. What do I do about it?" And I say, "This is the doing. Exploration tills the soil, which facilitates the self-correcting mechanism, the normalization process, freedom, emancipation. Just till the soil. Just like put a seed in the ground. If the ground is compacted, it doesn't grow that well. But if you just till the soil, the whole thing blossoms. The inner divine nature of the seed itself is facilitated in its expansion, in its liberation. You see, spiritual liberation, not spiritual indoctrination. You see, education, real education, isn't about indoctrination. Now, again, here we go with the double-edged sword, the two sides of the same coin, because, there are things we want to teach our kids, and they need to learn reading, writing, arithmetic, what have you. And you might say, well, isn't that indoctrination? Well, you could say that, but the thing is, there's two sides of every coin. And so when does indoctrination cease to be supportive and become confining, limiting, constraining, whatever?
Well, it can also go the other way too, with just the let go and let God, kind of thing.
Exactly. I was just trying to think of a way to go there, Scotty. That's right.
Yeah.
Because when does education cease to be education and just become no holds barred? Don't indoctrinate me into anything. Just let me go. Let God. In extreme cases, I heard of people that didn't want to teach their kids anything. If they want to learn how to read, they have to do it on their own. Yes, they should be free to play and run. And let go and let God. No. You see, so when does education become indoctrination? And when does indoctrination cease to be education and become something else? And what is real education? Yeah. Yeah. Just one thing I want to bring up is this whole thing with Cuba and what's going on with Cuba. It just is painful. And if you watch these people being interviewed in Miami, who came home from Cuba and they have relatives still in Cuba and all that, and the hell that the relatives in Cuba are going through and the terrible things that happen. So now there's an uprising, there's a movement. And how do we support that movement in a positive direction to support humanity, to support human beings? They talk about inalienable rights. And again, what the heck does that mean? Inalienable gift given to us by God. What the heck does that mean? God's up there passing out rights? No. It means our own true nature. God is nature, Mother Nature, so to speak. And that's what an inalienable right is. It's our nature to live in freedom. It's our, and again, what does freedom mean? Anyway, everything's double-sided, and that's just something for you to think about, I guess. But the point is, we have our nature, and it's inalienable. It's our own true nature, and it's divine. You see, our real nature is divine. And so what do? They're talking about making the internet available so these people can at least get out there and say what's going on because the internet's shut down. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I don't know how much it's going to do, but it would help. And there are also things about embargoes. I understand that I may have heard this wrong, but they're trying to impose a thing where businesses that are free of the government we'll deal with, but government businesses in Cuba we won't deal with. That's, to me, is pretty hard to sort out. So how do you manage the whole thing? I don't know. And then you can talk about, well, you can't do a blockade. A blockade is legally a declaration of war, I think, if I understand that correctly. But maybe even just a show of our presence with ships offshore, not because of military threat, but maybe that would just help the people in Cuba know, hey, the world is supporting you. The world is supporting you. We're not trying to make these guys right, these guys wrong. We just know that they're suffering there and we want to help. You see? So I'm very passionate about the whole Cuba thing. And I also get a little confused about, we're letting people just flood in through Mexico. And the arguments are that, no borders aren't right, or I don't know, different arguments. But then we're not letting people in from Cuba. Who was it, the Department of Defense or somebody got up and was saying, somebody in the White House, associate was saying, if you try to come over here in a boat from Cuba, we will turn you back. So be warned, I mean, it's just, to me, there's such a contradiction there, And then you hear some people on one side say, well, it's because people from Mexico, they think are Democrats, and the people from Cuba, they think will be predominantly Republican. And then the war goes on and yin creates yang, and there's this big fight, But please watch the news, not just one channel, all the channels. You don't even have to spend a long time, just get a feeling. It's an important time in the history of our world. There's a phase transition going on. I've talked about that at length, but we're in the midst of that phase transition. And it's no time to bury our heads in the sand. I'm not telling you what to think. I'm just inviting you to be aware of what's going on in the world and then make your own decision, but have it be informed. And it's not informed if you're not watching the news and seeing things from both sides, you know. All right, I guess that's about it for today. Oh, I see a garb of mysticism, you know. In closing, there is a technology that facilitates this whole process of liberation, freedom from Gecko. It's a technology. We talked about meditation, we talked about inner exploration, but there's an even very, very important one. And that is the idea of an enlivening, that universal, transcendental, deep inner knowing, that wisdom within, that source of intelligence that feeds life, just like watering the root of a plant. And there's a technology of, and I've talked about it, the enlightened city. It was given to us by Mamuni Mayan, who was a great seer of ancient times, a rishi. And we have the technology. And that's the one ancient technology, you see, if we feed the awareness of the people, if we evolve people, all the other ancient technologies, and you can read about them or see them on TV specials or things, all those become available. But the key to all of those ancient wisdoms and new things that we've never even thought of, it's in expanding and freeing the awareness of humanity. And as Mamuni Mayan said, there's a technology of an enlightened city that builds that unified field generator, and that's what we're about here. And that's Mount Soma. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for listening, and that's enough for today. And talk to you again next week.